Hello, and welcome to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. I'm Ryan Purvis, your host, supported by our producer Heather Bicknell. In this series, you'll hear stories and opinions from experts in the field, stories from the front lines, the problems they face and how they solved them, the areas they focused on from technology, people and processes, to the approaches they took that will help you to get to the grips with the digital workspace inner workings. So welcome, Lisa, to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. Do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. So I work in strategy execution. That's been my whole background. And I mentor executives to accelerate their projects and their change. So my clients love having that sounding board for the, and to get some fresh ideas. That's what they hire me for. And so they can fast track what they're doing. And I also have a membership as well, Turbocharge Your Transformation, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's we overlap nicely there, that I like to be the trusted advisor or fulfill the trusted advisor role too, with customers where they can just come and talk. And you're South African, I'm South African, we're pretty plain speaking people. So they know they're getting good feedback or the feedback they don't want to hear necessarily. But it helps them to cut through some of the bureaucracy or the red tape or change their thinking a little bit or challenge some of their thinking, which I think they don't always get with their directs.
Exactly.
So it'd be interesting to hear more about how you've got to this position, maybe.
Sure. So I started in South Africa working for what was then Anderson Consulting. It's now Accenture. And I was basically sitting behind a green screen doing COBOL and a few other things and other kinds of coding. And then I'm very much a people's person. And I found a lot of the reason why the projects, the systems, when we implemented them, didn't stick was because of just the change in the people side. So I became really interested in that. And then to cut a long story short, I left and I went to the US and I was interviewing with a few firms and I got a job offer from McKinsey. And I thought, fantastic, I'm going to move here. I'm going to go and work and I tried all sorts of different things because you don't need to specialize in choose whether it's technology or change or it's just a whole lot of sort of strategic kind of projects. I love doing that. But again, the reason why a lot of the strategy work didn't stick was the people. So again, long story short, came to Australia with a backpack and basically stayed and went to go work for a culture change organization. And then in 1999, I started out on my own. So yeah,
wow.
going on 24 years. And I sort of put all that knowledge together. So I've been doing, implementing change programs, all sorts of transformation programs from a multidisciplinary perspective, usually in the role of program director or program manager, and love doing that. And I've had very high success rates in an environment where traditionally it's been, there's been a lot of failure rates. And so, but it's taken me a long time to get to a point where I'm sort of confident enough to kind of go out there and really own it. And I think that's what happens when you start getting older. You sort of just get to the point where, I can, I know I can do this. And so that's why I'm so excited. Well, two things. One is that I've sort of moved more and more into mentoring teams and executives to advise them on how to accelerate what they're doing in strategy, transformation, all of that. And then the other part is that I've started a membership this year. So that's the Turbocharge Your Transformation membership. And the purpose of that is twofold. One is to teach people how to do all of this from the lessons of what's been most successful, and also to create a bit of a community and that kind of confidence that people have that there are other people that are doing this sort of innovative work. And it's pretty tiring and it's pretty hard and it's pretty lonely sometimes, especially when you're in a big corporate and you've got really prickly politics to deal with. And although there are people all around you, it can feel quite lonely. So it's quite nice to have a sounding board for that. And I've got a way where people can do it and still get a bit of confidentiality. But get some advice. So, so that's what I do.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the politics, the prickly politics. I was just talking to someone about it yesterday. That everyone thinks the higher up you go in a role, the easier it gets. It actually gets more and more complicated, and you've really got to. And I struggled with this when we moved to the UK because the people I spoke to didn't speak the same way that I spoke. They were not direct and blunt and solve the problem people. They would talk around it. And I had to learn a hard lesson around how you had to have meetings before the meeting, and you had to
Ah,
lobby, and you had to get to know people, and you had to know all about where they were coming from and what their things were and all that stuff. And then you would be able to get buy into what you wanted to think. But it was a hard year and a half of as a typical Springbok rugby player would run into people and run them over. That didn't work in the political game. You had to be a little bit more, Kiwi in the sense of, a lot of fancy footwork. But in the end, you got to win the game somehow, and then the only way to win it was to get people on board. And that's kind of where value came from to a large extent. Was how did you and value as a product, value as a framework. How did you get people aligned? What kind of, how did you go about doing it without becoming imposing, but more consultative, more trust building, very clear on what the reasons why we were doing something. So the value of doing this thing. Why was this thing the most important thing to be doing? What was the sequence to do it? All that kind of stuff. Which, led me to my sort of going on my own a year ago, just over a year ago, more formally. I've always had sort of the consulting stuff that I've done, even when I was full time, with full transparency to who I was employed by. But this was much more formal in the sense of going into customers and saying, okay, well, you bought this product, you spent $1 million on it. Why are you not seeing any value? Well, it's because your whole structure is wrong. Like you're not geared up in the right ways. You're still doing everything the way you did it before, but now you're expecting the technology to solve your problem. You've got to change how you work and all
yeah.
that kind of. And some of those conversations are not as I say, not blunt conversations. They are 6, 8, 10, 20 conversations over a period
Yeah.
of time. And you just got to constantly be feeding back and guiding somebody.
So that's exactly, sorry, go ahead.
No, I said that,
Yeah.
and I think that's where we overlap. I think we've probably done
Yeah.
something very similar in just different disciplines.
Yeah, so that's exactly the thing, because it's quite hard for a lot of folks that are in the digital technology space that are
Yeah.
technical and have come from a technical background to think from an integrated perspective, and so they miss the cues. And what you've just described, Ryan, it's quite interesting. Are you doing the video as well for this? Because if so, I'm happy to share a diagram if you like.
Yeah. We'll do the video, and then also, if you don't mind, we just do a screenshot of or whatever you're sharing.
Of course.
The audio only.
Of course. So what you've described, Ryan, is thinking from a multidisciplinary perspective, and that is very unusual for folks that have come from one discipline. Because what they tend to do is they tend to think from one or two disciplines generally, I find. So people have come from like the business, kind of focused on a business outcome, like in your case, technology, or being a subject matter expert on a project, or being a product manager. They would all fit in the circle at the top, which is the business circle. Okay. Yeah. So thinking from a specialized subject matter expertise perspective, thinking about the business outcome. Okay.
Yeah.
Folks who've got a technology background, and many of those who listening I understand do, will mostly have a project management background as well. That's the second green circle.
Yeah.
What people also need to execute change is to be able to think about the change management and the people. That's the third circle. And folks who can think from that multidisciplinary perspective in the middle are the most powerful. And then I'll take it one step beyond, because if you can then adapt the approach in the organization you're working in to their culture in the workplace, then it's those people and working on those projects that will get that flywheel effect for ROI and innovation.
Yeah.
And that's the
I-
model that I teach people. And the whole philosophy of Turbocharge Your Transformation is based on that.
I love this. I love this diagram. I think it's such a so for the value framework that we put together over the years, we don't have this kind of image. We have a different one, and we don't call it. I mean, there's the similarities, but it's not the same thing. I've worried more around strategy and execution underpinned by people, and the strategy comes from business and change.
Right.
So it's just it's blocks, not circles and all the rest of it, but it's with an arrow, to the right. So very similar. So I mean, I think you've actually, it's a much better way of putting it. So now how do people resonate with that? When you show it to them, do they get it? Do you have to spend quite a lot of time coaching them through it?
I think people get it at an intellectual level, but I think only when they really learn some of and experience a program where they asked to think from that multidisciplinary perspective, only then do they actually really get it. Because when I'm working with people, I get them to think about every single task on their project plan, for example. So say they're doing a big ERP implementation and the whole business's basic core systems are all being redeveloped or replaced. They like every task on that project plan can be done from that multidisciplinary perspective, rather than separate. So I'll give you an example. One of the projects I was working on, we had to do a selection of a new system, and it was a government organization, and they have quite a big tendering process to go out and look at different providers for the system. And they usually put together the brief and then of what they're looking for. Well, they do the whole project setup, then they do the brief of what sort of system they want. Then they put out a very detailed request for tender, and then they pull a panel together to review them all and to review the shortlists and then select. And then they disperse the panel. Whereas what we did on the project was we got all the work I do is co-designed with people. So the strategy right up front, you get the people involved right at the beginning. So instead of thinking as a tender panel that was going to do a business selection of a business vendor, right? We thought of it as, well, that's actually a whole broader project process of involving people the whole way through. So we set up a cross-functional working group representing all parts of the business and all levels. And you're smiling, you know what I'm going to get at, right?
No,
they got the whole way through this. And then when it came to, right up front, they did all the strategy bit. They were invested in the systems. They got their information from their divisions and they represented their divisions. So when it came to, even by the time that the system was chosen and we needed to start implementing it, was going to be a very unpopular system, this particular system, because it meant people had to change the way they were working significantly. But the change management was built in, because we had all the change champions who actually had selected the system effectively. So the culture, it just fitted the culture and the way they did things with a very strong compliance focus. So there was going to be a huge backlash in that business. Because it was a divisional, siloed business, but we had representation from all different parts of the business. So culturally, the folks felt like they were involved, and their division had a say, and the whole system was implemented really successfully. And they saved this was an Australian government organisation that saved significant millions of dollars every year, tens of millions. Because of it. So if the team had not had that the program manager that worked, just all of that, like the different thinking from those different disciplines, and they would have done it separately, that's where I've seen it fall over and fail. Yeah. So
no, 100%. The Big Bang failures. And I've seen it with people building very single discipline, like very strong project managers who very much care about the project plan, the critical path, the risks, the methodology, but not about any of the other stuff. So they only focus on that stuff, and then they don't bring anybody else along on the journey, and it becomes these weekly meetings of just basically task driven. Have you done your task? Have you done your task? And then no one looks forward to the meeting because it's just a case of I'm going to get beaten up because I haven't done my tasks, I haven't logged my time, or whatever. And this is one of the reasons why the framework developed, was a reminder of why you're doing this all the time, and having the people involved. And while I was smiling when you were explaining it, it reminded me very much of how when I left working on the system integrator side and I went to work for a vendor, it was a business process management company called Global 360. And the reason why I was interested in them is that they took what they called the persona approach, which is you'd go and interview the people that were doing the process at the front line about what they did. But you wouldn't just go and interview them like we do now in a call. You'd literally go to their desk and you'd sit with them while they worked in the day, and you'd see how they circumvented their current systems. Because everyone circumvents the current system. There's always a way around.
Yeah.
How many times they phone Joe because Joe just gets us through, and how many times they and all that stuff. And then that's how we would design the replacement. So when we designed the replacement system, and they had a very cool way of building someone's workbench for them, where you turn on the widget you want to have, and you basically create their workbench. That person was part of designing their own screen. And it was very clunky, but the guys who designed the widgets were the same guys who designed the iPhone. So it had the same intuitiveness to it. And your adoption was like 100%, because the person would go, well, this is, instead of me logging into 5 different systems, I'm logging into one system, because all the data was being contextually brought to them, because they'd now designed what they needed. And instead of having 26 buttons to have to click and remember, they had 3.
Amazing.
Because all the stuff that they needed to do, all the shortcuts we were able to bring in through the technology and present it to them. But they owned the solution. And a lot of that stuff, there were a lot of good stories. I mean, there was one where they were processing backlogs of documents. It was a US, I think it was a county sheriff in California. They had this huge backlog of court documents, and they had like 12 people doing this backlog scanning. And they implemented the system, and they knocked it down to about 5 people. But they were doing 5 times the volume of work, because they were the ones that had bought into the system and were therefore efficient. And the 7 that hadn't bought in had basically left, and they used the money from what they saved to incentivize. It was all gamification based as well. So like how you doing with other people and all that kind of stuff. And they incentivized people that whoever was the top at the end of the year would get a 2-week paid vacation anywhere in the world. 5-star, whatever it was. And I mean, I think the trip might have cost 20 grand in those days, 30 grand, but they saved hundreds of thousands, if not millions, just because they got this process efficient and they caught their backlog up. In fact, they were ahead of the schedule because of the buy-in of the people, and because they had the trust in the system, and the system could be evolved. They could improve the system as things got better. Which was obviously another thing, is they had the ability to direct how the system got better, not someone in another department who didn't care, which is what you often have in technology versus the business, because it is in a lot of businesses versus the business.
Yes.
They're logging in a support ticket, they're logging in a request, it goes to some black hole in IT, and it never gets delivered, which is demoralizing. And that's where shadow IT comes from, because most businesses go, you know what, I can just go buy a SaaS service now on my credit card. I can have a CRM today. I can pay a consulting firm as a part of that deal on my corporate card. I don't need to go through IT. And then IT finds out, and then there's the worst situation where they're trying to bring this thing back in, but it's all on a negative foundation.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
how can I ask you a question?
go ahead.
How did you learn the importance of the people in the change management? Because a lot of the people with a technology background that I talk to, they don't truly think from in that way. They don't think in that way.
Well, it's quite funny. I was talking to my mom about this last night. So I've never fitted in. Like, as far as my earliest memories go, I was always the guy outside, like any sports team. I would be in the sports team, but there would always be a nucleus of people, and I'd always be on the outside. And I'd always struggle to to be included or whatever it was. And I think having that situation from the get-go, I've always had to find ways to fit in. So, you know, when I started writing code, I loved writing code. It was a thing, and that was a nice place to go because you could just write code and get instant results. But I found that as much as I enjoyed it, I also found it very unfulfilling because I wanted to know what the user wanted to do.
Yeah, like me. Yeah.
You know, and I think it comes back to that thing that you know, I used to, you know, in all the sports I played, I used to solve all the problems with a solution, and I used to go and tell it to people, and I had a coach who used to verbally abuse me about all the stuff. You know, he used to call it shock treatment. But I always found that if I could get past him with what I was doing, then I would be on it. Then I would have answered. And I say he verbally abused me because nowadays we call it verbal abuse. In those days, he was just being hard on me. But I found that if I could get past him, I'd learned how to deal with the rejections from him. Then everyone else would just buy in, because he would have asked all the tough questions. He would have really made me cringe and think and whatever. And he always made a point of telling me his stories about how he always pushed himself to be a level above where he was. So as much as he would give me crap all the time and abuse me, he would also tell me how to get around it. So I think that kind of set the frame that when I got into corporate world, or when I was selling to customers and dealing with them, I was always prepared for those rejections anyway, and I knew how to think on my feet with that sort of stuff. So the technology part was always the easy part because I'd written the code. I knew how easy the code was.
Yeah.
And yes, I know it takes time sometimes to do something, but in reality, there's nothing you can't solve with the technology. It's more the people that you have to get around, and expectation management was one of those things. So I think it's always been there. And you know, there's that energy you get from the people, and you can pick up pretty quickly when the energy's wrong.
Yeah.
And it just became more and more that as much as I'm a technologist, the technology goes more and more to the left. You know, it goes 20% of the solution, 80% of it is the people part.
Yeah.
And I just it became more and more about getting the people to buy in, getting the people to want to do the stuff. And I also, you know, had a couple, you know, rough, when I was first managing people, a couple of rough instances where, you know, telling them what to do wasn't the right way to do it. So I had to learn that the first thing you do is ask them what they want to do, then you coach them on where you want them to go, and then the last thing is you tell them what to do. So they can't get it. You got to give them some rope, but at some point you've got to be, you know, you got to deliver something, so you got to be the last thing. But it was just the order of that. And a lot of military stuff over the years I've read, and how, you know, the good militaries don't tell their people what to do. They just tell them what the problem is and ask them how to solve it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's great to hear, you know, and obviously stood you in great stead. It just made me think of, you know, one South African talking to another. When I first came to Australia, I went via the US and spent a couple of years there, but and there, you know, it's fine to be direct, and the South African sort of direct way is quite appreciated, but it's not as much appreciated in Australia sometimes, and it can be seen as quite arrogant. So you know, that telling, you kind of I really had to learn how to just tone it down and be a bit more patient and a little bit you know. So that was quite, yeah. That's what it made me think of when you were saying.
It's 100% right. I mean,
tell last, ask, don't tell. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was my experience. I moved to the UK because even by South African standards, I was considered to be quite not passive aggressive, but I didn't dictate even in South Africa. Like, I was very much like, well, what do you want to do? How do you want to do it, etc. And then I got to the UK and they said, no, you're way too aggressive, way too direct. And I was like, but I'm not even nearly direct. Like, by you know, if you had to have some of the guys I know, you would be crying. Like, if you think I'm direct, you know. And I had to really learn that and that's why I learned to do the meetings before the meetings.
Yeah.
And my boss, I mean, I was an engineering lead at the time. He used to say, why is your diary so full of meetings? Like, your job is to build stuff. I said, yeah, but I've got to talk to all the people.
I call them corridor conversations, all the corridor conversations before the meeting.
Yeah. But because you're in a global organization, they're, you know, your guys are US guys in Asia. So I want to talk to these people. I've got to talk to them multiple times in a week to get them to trust me enough, and vice versa, and hear all their moaning about what we want to do, so that I can, when they moan about it, I'm like, okay, you're gonna moan about this, you moan about this, that. So here's how we solve that problem. Here's how we solve it. Oh yeah, that's cool. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
So by the time you get to the big meetings, everyone was so, not docile, but so on board that the actual meeting was so quick. Like, you kind of go, why is that meeting so quick? I said, well, because everyone's already on board. It was just a case of you guys getting to hear that they were on board.
Perfect.
And it doesn't always work, but it works most of the time.
It's like being a cultural chameleon, right? You kind of just you figured out how things will work in the culture that you're working in, and you needed to have those conversations first. Brilliant.
Yeah, look, and I think the other thing, which my dad worked for SAA back in the good old days, so I traveled a lot, and I think having that exposure to different countries from an early age. I mean, my first trip overseas with my dad on my own was Hong Kong. You couldn't be more different to South Africa from an exposure point of view. And we spent a lot of time in Asia, a lot of time in various European countries. So, as I grew up, I saw things and I met people, and I had to learn little bits of language and a little bit of cultural things. And I think that also helps now, that when I speak to someone and they go, oh yeah, I'm from Nijmegen in Amsterdam. I'm like, oh yeah, I worked there for 6 weeks. Oh, where were you? Oh, no, that's here.
Nice.
Instantly you connected. And I think that's an important piece as well, is that to find that way to connect with people. Just to have that little bit of foundation, then you can build on the foundation.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So anyway, enough about me. So tell me about your Turbocharge newsletter and all the rest of it. How has that become your go-to-market? Like, what is your thinking behind that?
Sure. So when I started this year building the membership, the Turbocharge Your Transformation membership, I've sort of had to move from being basically I've always marketed B2B, so directly, go to corporate clients, have a coffee with them, they get to know me, they call me when there's work, and in between gigs, you kind of do a bit more coffee, have a few more coffees, and then you get the incoming calls, and that's how I'd fed myself for over 20 years. And what I realized in building a membership like this is I'd have to change to focus also on B2C selling, so selling to individuals who would buy the membership individually, rather than selling to a corporate who might buy dozens, if not hundreds of seats for the membership at a time. So they're two quite different markets. So the newsletter is very powerful for a B2C market, particularly if you connecting with so many people on LinkedIn, and then you want to remind them and tell them about what you do, and remind them that you're around, and you want them to join up on a website directly. Right, who they may not have met me, and they've got to just kind of go from knowing me a little bit better online, and then clicking on that join now button. So, and it's not a huge cost. It's sort of $99 a month, and they're getting a masterclass. They're getting a PowerPoint or playbook of templates that they can use immediately on their projects, and they're getting a group coaching session every month, all an hour, and every month a different topic. So it's not a huge sell, but still people don't know me online at all. So what the newsletter does is it helps me build a relationship with those people. So I had already to start about 2,500 to 3,000 email addresses of people that I have worked with over the years, because in any given year, over 20 plus years, I'd worked with 3 or 4 organizations, and I had the email addresses of the people because I love people, so I collect people and I keep their details. So that's how I started at the beginning of the year with these 2,500 or 3,000 names, and then I've grown them through connecting with people and asking people to send it out to more people, and and that's how the newsletter is growing. And I can talk to you more about that if you think the folks would be interested in that. But I love writing it.
Yeah, so I think that's the interesting part for me. So we have a very similar approach. So when I started the podcast a couple of years ago, the reason why I started was that I wanted to write a book, and I wrote the book, and then I decided that the book just didn't get it across like I wanted it to, so I wrote it again and still couldn't get it across. So I started the podcast because I was tired of putting all these hours into the book and just not getting that, and it's probably imposter syndrome more than anything else. So with starting the podcast, we started obviously building some following around that, and we use LinkedIn as our primary thing. And I realized somewhere along the line that if I did it through LinkedIn all the time, that at some point LinkedIn could change my audience, which they've already done multiple times, and I've seen friends that have been blocked and all the rest of it. So that's when I started collecting for the newsletter, but I didn't do I already had a list of people on the newsletter. I just let it build itself. So I started off with 1 and then 5 and then 20 and whatever it was, but that was purely based on the episodes of the podcast going up. But it was for the same reason that you were doing it, is to build credibility. So LinkedIn posts, email was all about building credibility, or not just me, but the people we were talking to. So the reason why the podcast existed was, 1, for me to meet new people like yourself, and 2, to build credibility around what we talked about, and people could then understand that, here's Lisa, she does these things, I can talk to her.
That's right.
So we tried a community out with Slack. It didn't work. One, I just find Slack a terrible tool to look at every day, so I didn't go in there myself. And 2, you need people to talk in the group, otherwise it doesn't go anywhere.
Yes.
So now we're trying again with another product called Circle, which is a bit more a community-driven tool. We have a similar
Circle. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like
I'll send you
mighty networks and one of those community platforms. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So we're trying out with that. Yeah.
How are you finding that?
I think the tool's okay, but it comes back to the same problem again. People need to talk in them.
Yeah.
And what we've done initially is we've said that the community itself is free to join, but then there's a sub community inside there, which is the value execs community, which is for the fractional consultant looking for more fractional work. And they get access to the training that we've got, they get access to the product that we've got when that's ready, etc. But now I'm thinking that actually the whole community needs to become paid for, and that'll drive, because we're about 50 members, I think, give or take, to get that going. And we run a monthly networking session. So it's similar in some respects to what you're doing.
What do they pay? What do the members pay?
Well, so the main one is free. For the value execs, it starts at about $50 a month.
Okay. Pounds.
And pounds, yeah.
Yeah.
And the crux of value execs is if I get fractional opportunities, that's why I post them. I post them in that paid for group.
Right.
Because that's what most people I speak to. And the story behind that is when I was trying to sell people on the product through my network, most of them are going, yeah, I love the product, we'll definitely give it a go. But how do you do the fractional work? How do you get consulting work? Because I want to transition out of my full-time gig into fractional, or I've been doing fractional for a while and I'm really concerned the market's flat. How do you find work? And I mean, the reality is most of what you get fractional wise is through your network.
Yes.
But the other part to it, which is what we do with the community, is by being visible. So everyone that joins Value Execs comes on the podcast. They go on our YouTube series, and then we put them to our partner podcast that we have. There's a few of those, and then we want to do, and I say want because we're still doing this part, take their content that they are publishing and then republish it. And the idea behind this is based on Ubuntu, which is I am because we are, is to be unselfish. And we are getting some of the members putting in the opportunities that that they can't handle or that they don't want to take on into the group as well, to say, well, look, I've got this opportunity. I can't do it right now, or it's not my skill set, but can somebody else pick this up? And it builds trust there where they can say, look, I can't do this, but here's someone from my community that can help you out. And we had a networking call last week where two members never met each other before. We just basically let them speak because they were just saying like, I do this. Oh, that's great. That's a synergy. Let's chat. I can help you, etc., etc. And I was like, well, we can just drop off and let you guys just carry on because it's clearly working for you two to have this chat. And they've gone off and met separately. And that was the goal of the community, was just to create these connections for people to help each other and have this sort of trusted network.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So I think, similar to what you're doing in some respects, building credibility, but for a group.
Yeah. There's a nice app called, it's an app and website called Letter Growth. I don't know if you've come across that.
No, not yet.
What that is a platform for newsletter creators to meet other newsletter creators and find cross-promotional opportunities. So in there's a whole lot of, so I've just started reaching out to some people in there, and I'm going to use that as a, to swap promotional opportunities with people at a similar level and with a similar audience. So that's quite a powerful tool, I think.
Yeah, and I think that is the trick is to grow your audience, but then also to cross-pollinate with somebody else's audience, because that's how you get your exposure. Not that everyone's the same, but you want to go into circles where you're not a strong presence.
That's right.
And expand it out. I mean, I spoke to, I don't know if you know Lloyd, he was on my podcast recently. I mean, he's got I don't remember the numbers now, but a massive newsletter. It's in the millions. And he's written a book on his 13 rules and whatever it is. And all the stuff we're doing is kind of in those rules of growing the thing. The only thing that he does, which I haven't done yet, is face-to-face events.
Right.
Which is what he was doing.
Do you have most of your community based in the UK?
I'd say
Europe?
I've got a couple in the US, mostly Europe, UK, Europe. And interestingly enough, and I don't want to misspeak on this, but I find it's more, if it's UK based, the majority are actually immigrants to the UK. And I don't know why that is. It might just be a coincidence. But if I think about the majority of who signed up recently, they've either been foreigners or immigrants.
Do you think there's a correlation between people working in the fractional space, perhaps, or just, or maybe because you cover a lot of things around sort of starting up working in this kind of way that maybe people are in transit, sort of, or just, I don't know, thinking in their life, transit in their life, and
I think if you've immigrated, you naturally are a hustler because you've already had to move out of your home comfort zone.
Oh, that's so true. That is so true.
And if you're in that mindset, then you're prepared to do not necessarily anything you can, but you're open to more opportunities and more ways of doing things. So you have that drive that I'm not saying people don't have drive when they live there, but I think if you're an immigrant, you have that extra drive. And there's a statistic that some economists put out once upon a time that an immigrant is worth 7 jobs in the economy.
Amazing.
And I always find that interesting because if you look at Brexit, that's the anti-immigrant, anti-migrant thing, which and the UK is under pressure, and it's not surprising. Whereas you look at the US, I mean, most of the successful people are immigrants. I mean, Steve Jobs is probably the most successful, and his family are immigrants. All the big corporates are run by guys from India. All the successful ones.
Many, Indian migrants are punching well above their weight in Australia too. Yeah.
But it's because they've taken, they're hustlers, and I've never been to India, but Durban. I mean, there's a lot of, you learn a lot about Indian culture there. They're hustlers. They're prepared to do it. And so I think to answer your question on the fractionals, I think I'm getting a lot of that interest because the people that are looking for it You get the odd ones that they reach the point in their career that they know they won't get another job because they're getting to the age that no one will hire them because of these archaic and what do you call it, artificial ceilings that you can't work beyond a certain
Yeah.
age,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
So they've got no choice but to become a consultant or a fractional.
Yeah.
But then so there's still that percentage. But I think the majority are just hustlers looking to to have multiple income streams and to have enjoy it, do the stuff they enjoy too. I think there's also that.
Yeah, definitely.
So what's your take on it?
No, I think you're right. I hadn't really thought about it, to be honest. So I'm just thinking through some of the folks that I work with. We have about 20 consultants in our core Future Builders community, in our core group, who do a fair bit of work under the Future Builders banner. There are 4 of us who are like directors. It's a virtual organization. We set it up 10 years ago. So although I've been independent, and I'm doing air quotes here, since 99, about 10 years ago we set up the Future Builders Group brand for all of us. So we all have our own PTY Limited businesses underneath that, our own P&Ls, but we combine and have a combined website, and we have combined marketing and combined approaches and values, and collaborate very closely together. So and it's good fun that way. And it feels. I was catching up with some of the directors today, and we were saying it sort of feels like we've got a bit of a home base, even though we still running our own business. So I that's why I encourage people who are working as solopreneurs and consultants and coaches to find their people, find a community, communities like you've got and I've got and others, because that sort of home base is and that sort of sharing of like leads and gigs when people don't want them, and that you could do quite well yourself, that you're quite well suited to, those kinds. And there's more of that, more and more of that popping up. And the other thing I like about it, I suppose, since COVID, is just the move to more of a digital learning and being able to learn with other people online. I like the idea of being able to, for people to be able to learn online and learn on an ongoing basis, rather than not only doing one-off courses, but have these sort of memberships where they can learn with other people, because and then they've got other people to ask questions, because you've got social learning, which is learning from other peers, is such an important part of learning as well. And everything that I read on and research on the skills-based economy, skills-based businesses, is that we're just heading in that direction where skills are becoming so obsolete so fast, and people just need to keep up. And the volume, the sheer information overload out there is just massive, and people don't have time to curate and work out what the most important things are to learn. So if communities and memberships can help them do that a bit, and rather than them randomly doing searches on Google all day to find the things that they need to know, because they've just got all this FOMO, haven't they? I mean, we all do. Like we absorbing content at the rate of knots, and then wondering, well, what the hell else are we missing? What don't we know that we should know?
And it's interesting. So a couple of things you said there. So value execs is very similar to what you have with Future Builders. Future Builders is the right name,
yeah? Yeah. So is that your banner? That's the name of your group of all your consultants, is that?
Well, So value execs is the paid for service that's around the opportunities. And I did foresee at some point you would have like groups or pods of execs going in to help a company. So you might need a CRO, you might need a CTO, you might need a growth person. With the training stuff, I mean, we've put some courses together which we sell through the platform as well. But the part that we haven't hit on yet is the masterclasses. And I was just thinking about that, from a visibility thing again, having the masterclass. Do you put the masterclass as part of your community?
Yes.
Or do you make it a public thing?
No.
And then Okay, interesting. Yeah, I suppose that is the way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the masterclasses are the most valuable content. So I've got a fraction of that in the newsletters.
Yeah.
I do webinars and on other people's communities or podcasts and talk about some of the content. But the most valuable content and the really useful frameworks are in the masterclasses. And what I do is then I teach people how to use. So today's, what's today, Wednesday? Yesterday, sorry, the days are running into each other. It's been such a busy week. Yesterday I ran, so every month it's a masterclass and then it's a group coaching session 2 weeks later. And so this month was, the topic was conquering change clarity. So the core framework is how do you plan change on a page, which is a lean, agile tool for change planning. And anyone can go and pull off a free template off a Google search, right? But the magic is in how to develop and adjust the framework to suit the culture and the particular problem that you're working on, the project or product launch or whatever it is. And then how to think about the culture that you're in, how to think from that multidisciplinary perspective and be able to plan for that change in a way that is most effective and going to be successful, and how to think of it as that whole process of bringing people along and co-design. So it's sort of coming from, you're not going to learn it only in a change management workshop. You're not going to learn it only from a project management perspective. You're not going to learn it if you do a design thinking course. You're not going to learn it like if you just come from a single discipline approach. And so not only am I teaching it from that multidisciplinary perspective, but it's valuable because of the people in the community. So the masterclass is mostly me and sometimes a colleague teaching the program for an hour. So we do an hour express, very condensed, lots and lots of information in there.
Yeah.
They've had the playbook for 2 weeks before, which is the editable PowerPoint, which has got the frameworks, it's got all the presentation material, everything in, and it's in a version that they can then adjust and reuse themselves. So if a lot of them are consultants, so they want frameworks like, that they can use. So all those pages are editable, so they can use them and adjust them and make them their own. And then and then they come to the group coaching session 2 weeks later, and everybody contributes, and we go into breakout rooms. So if you were coming along with your, digital transformation expertise, you would be able to contribute from that unique perspective of, well, if I was planning a change for digital transformation, this is how I might think of it differently. And so you connect with other people that are, in the community. We break out into one-on-ones or groups of threes or whatever, depending on the day. And then, so you meet some of those people, and then also people will send in their problems that they're working on, or the framework that they've applied. Right. So we had one yesterday where somebody wanted to set up a change management function in their business. It was a very fast-growing business, and they'd filled out a change plan to launch a change community in-house. And then we all contributed. I used a visual whiteboarding tool, and everybody had access to it on the Zoom call, and we all put different Post-it notes online. And so that person went away with all sorts of great ideas. So yeah, it's sort of
I love the model. I'm going to steal it, just to be honest.
Good.
I
Do that.
think it's great.
And I'm hoping we can collaborate further, Ryan, as well, because I really love what you're doing, and I love your multidisciplinary approach that you're taking. And I've got so much content, it's coming out of my ears, and I cannot wait to get it out there. So I would love to be able to share.
Well, maybe you're my first masterclass. Maybe you just run one of your masterclass in our group and see how it goes.
Yeah.
Because I think there's one of the things that I wanted out of the community is that there are experts in there, so the experts should come and do their masterclass. I mean, I don't know how to do it commercially. It might be free to begin with, but free to the members, but at least to start building that content train, and then build the membership up further, and that becomes how it gets commercialized. I don't know, but that's just me brainstorming with you as we're talking.
Yeah.
But there's lots of people that have got experience, guys that have grown businesses, they've exited out of startups, that sort of thing, which is often what I hear about people saying, well, I've got the startup, I want to build it, but like, how do you build a startup besides just building a product, or how do you go and sell it? How do you go and do your pitch decks? All that sort of knowledge is where I'm getting a lot of questions at the moment. But there's still, on the other side, the corporates going, well, now I've got less people, I need to do more work, and we need to solve these problems in the business. But
so you've got
how do
this.
Two different worlds all the time.
Yeah, this is interesting, right? Because I've got the same dilemma. So a lot of my work over the last couple of years, mentoring, has not only, well, the majority has actually been in smaller, high growth businesses, tech businesses, rather than big corporates. And so I have another whole set of IP. So I've got all these playbooks, right? I've carved up what I had into 16 different playbooks, right, on 16 different modules that I've got on, it's the one, so that there's one every month that's being introduced to the membership. So we're up to number 5 at the moment. So if anyone joins, they get all 5, and then they get the new one every month. Then I've got a whole nother, so that's the corporate sort of, how do you do transformation in a corporate? Then I've got another whole set of tools that I haven't done anything with yet, besides use them with my one-on-one, like if I'm mentoring a CEO of a tech firm, right? And this is on the whole business model, from purpose. So I've got purpose, strategy, go-to-market, org design, people and culture, execution, all of that, and product market fit, all of that. I've got those are all topics, and I've got all that stuff, and I can't do it all. I'm just like, but because I'm so excited with it all at the moment, I'm like a content factory. I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night and I have another idea for a newsletter. So I write it down sometimes, or sometimes I wake up and then I've forgotten it otherwise. So and so what's happening? That's why I'm posting a newsletter every week, because I don't know what to do with all the content I've got. So it's the only way, like otherwise I would have just done it monthly, but I've got all this content. So I want to get it out there, because I know, like, you read in the Harvard Business Review last year, they had an article, this year they had an article that based on 2022, they had 78% failure of transformations. You might have seen that one. And then McKinsey on its website consistently in different places talks about the failure rates they find are about 70% of transformations and strategy execution and all that. And I know that my success rate is really, like we've had over 50 transformations, 2 have failed. So that's like 96%. And you talk about imposter syndrome. It's taken a while for me to actually come out and be able to say that without sounding like a, overinflated ego.
Yeah.
And to own it. But I do, because now I know what works, and I want to share it with people. I really do, because all those failures are, stuff ups of careers, money down the drain, embarrassments, people losing their jobs, lost opportunities. It's terrible. I know, because when I've had those failures, it's taken me, ages to get over them. It's awful. Yeah. I had one of them. I had basically the sponsor was fired of the whole program. It was the most nightmare project I've ever worked on. The 2 of the stars of his people that were on the program had both resigned about 2 weeks before he was fired, because it was such a mess. And within about 6 to 12 months after, every single executive on the executive committee, that were all actually on our steering committee, left except for one.
Sure.
And it was an absolute mess, and I was the program manager, and I felt dreadful. I felt so bad, like I hadn't done anything.
I have a similar experience, not as dire as that. In fact, mine was the opposite one, which in some respects opposite, because no one fell on their sword for it, and they should have. And it was one of those things. I'd left a role to join this company, and I'd left early because they were doing this thing, and I was like, this is my expertise. Like, you cannot do this project without me. So I left early, came and joined them, got involved, and I kept saying to them, you're doing this wrong. You're picking the wrong technology. This is the right technology. This is how we have to do it. This is the approach. And they just ignored it and ignored it. And we picked the wrong technology. We put it in. The supplier knew it was the wrong technology. They told me they knew it was the wrong technology. They were trying to do things with this tech they would never be able to do. The technology was then bought by the vendor that they should have gone with, and this thing never delivered. I ended up resigning, and I ended up sitting with the head of the business, saying to him, "You need to pull the plug on this project. You've spent £1 million or whatever it was. In fact, it was £1 million by that point. You're not going to get this money back. The return on value is never going to happen. Like, you just got to pull the plug." Yeah. And he just looked at me and said, "I'm retiring in a couple of months. I'm out of here. And I'm not the one who's accountable for this. This person here is accountable, and he's not going to, until he does the right thing, we'll carry on." And they spent like 12 or 14 million on this thing, and they never delivered anything. And the irony is that the business was actually in a very good space. Because when you were telling me the story originally, when I smiled, there's a lot of times when people buy technology, they don't change how they do anything.
That's right.
They just carry on, and they think that there's
going to change. They put it in. It's an installation, not an implementation, is what my professor, James Colopio, who taught me when I did my MBA, he always used to describe it as that, and I love that expression. Exactly what it is.
100%. Yeah. And the irony with this is that the business actually had redesigned everything. They'd taken a shift left approach. They'd redesigned all their processes. Yeah. The business, like everyone in the business, was bought into this thing, and they ended up spending like 140K to put in something else that met the solution. And I was like, yeah, that's what it should have been. It should have been a very simple thing, but it went completely out of control. And that was all ego, just flashing. And the guy who should have taken the fall just refused to admit that he was wrong. And he kept saying, like, to me, like, have you got this in control? I was like, no, this is not in control. This will never be delivered. The guys are charging us double because they have to basically write everything custom to fill in the gaps for this technology. They could never do it in the first place. So I don't know which one's worse. People actually getting fired for a bad implementation, or the bad implementation carrying on and people still carrying on in roles, getting promoted through the process. I don't know which is worse. Yeah. Because they're both bad.
Yeah. Well, in the project I described, we never even got to implementation because nobody could agree on the strategy. So there you go.
So with this thing, they got rid of the vendor, brought another vendor in. They couldn't do it. So they paid all these vendors to try and solve this problem, but you can't solve the problem if the core thing is wrong.
No.
And the business ended up just getting another little vendor to just do what they needed to get them going. But it's just it's probably one of the reasons why value exists, is because of those sorts of bad decisions, and people not having a framework to make a decision. They just use their opinions, and I still believe there's a little bit of corruption, backhand or whatever it was, to go with this vendor, because that's the only reason you would have done it that way. I mean, we come from South Africa, we know what corruption looks like. It's played in your face. It's not like in the first world where everyone hides it a little bit more cleverly, but it still exists. So anyway, I don't know if you got anything else you want to chat about, or we can end it there, and we can put people to contact you.
I think that's probably a good place to end. I'd love it if people contact me if they've got any questions, if they want to sign up to my newsletter. Shall I? My website is our website is futurebuildersgroup.com, and if people go to the /Turbocharge, you can find the information on the Turbocharge. All my colleagues are up there. There's a resources section with my newsletter, and you can sign up. And
Great.
I'll give you all of that for your show notes as well, Ryan, and
Yeah, that'd be great.
the page that I spoke about as well. And look forward to doing a masterclass for you and some cross promotion. And let's get your mainly UK audience and my mostly Aussie audience with some. We've got some in the UK and some in the US and one in Mexico, but most of it is in Australia. So it would be quite nice to, do some collaboration.
Yeah, I look forward to it. We'll chat about that after this. And we'll make a plan.
Awesome.
Sounds good. Super.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Heather Bicknell is our producer and editor. Thank you, Heather, for your hard work on this episode. Please subscribe to the series and rate us on iTunes or the Google Play Store. Follow us on Twitter at the DWW Podcast. The show notes and transcripts will be available on the website www.digitalworkspace.works. Please also visit our website www.digitalworkspace.works and subscribe to our newsletter. And lastly, if you found this episode useful, please share with your friends or colleagues.